Before knowledge, before prayer, before even love itself, there was Adab, the first fragrance that rose from the garden of existence, the soul's instinctive bow before the unseen. Adab is not manners, it is remembrance in motion. It is the stillness before a word, the pause before the heart speaks, the way light bends when it approaches the sun. We used to know this art. Our ancestors walked gently upon the earth, spoke only when their hearts were awake, and listened as if the wind carried revelation. Every gesture was a form of worship, every silence a hidden Dhikr. But something was lost. The world became hurried. The sacred was replaced with spectacle. Now we speak the names of the divine, but we do not bow inside. We reach for heaven, yet forget to remove our shoes. And still, something in us remembers. A faint echo, like a pulse beneath the noise, calling us back to the way of presence. Because Adab is not just what you do, it is how you exist. It is the secret rhythm between creation and creator, the invisible courtesy between the breath and the one who gives it. When the heart remembers how to bow, the whole universe bows with it. And in that silence, between awareness and awe, you begin to feel what it means to stand before God. Even while sitting in this world, Adab is not a rule, it is a rhythm. It is how the soul remembers its place before the infinite, not as a servant trembling in fear, but as a lover standing in awe. In Sufi cosmology, Adab is the inner alignment between the human and the real, the unseen etiquette of the heart before the presence that never leaves. It is said, he who knows his Adab knows his Lord. Because every act of true courtesy, humility, restraint, reverence, mirrors the way existence itself bows to its source. Everything in creation practices Adab. The sun does not rise without permission, the ocean does not cross its boundary, even silence has a form of obedience. And yet we, the most conscious of beings, forget to bow inwardly. We walk through holy ground with distracted hearts. Adab begins when awareness returns to its axis. It is the quiet acknowledgement, I am not the center. It is the soul's posture, neither too high with pride nor too low with self-denial. It stands in perfect proportion, a heart upright before its beloved. The mystics say when a person has Adab, the world around them changes shape. The air becomes gentler. Words become fewer. Even their silence carries weight, as if something vast is listening through them. Adab is not submission through weakness. It is strength disguised as grace. To practice it is to polish the mirror of the self until it reflects nothing but presence. You begin to move as the cosmos moves, effortlessly, reverently, without resistance. When the prophet was asked about his character, he said, "My Lord has taught me Adab and made my Adab perfect." This is the essence of spiritual refinement, not to know more, but to be more attuned. Adab is the invisible bridge between knowledge and realization, between outer behavior and inner surrender. For the one who possesses Adab, even their breath becomes Dhikr, every glance a prayer, every silence an offering. And in this sacred posture, the soul learns what it truly means to live before God, not in fear of judgment, but in the radiant gravity of presence. Because Adab is the fragrance of those who have remembered who they are and whose gaze they stand within. Before man spoke, the angels bowed. Before the first prayer was ever uttered, there was Adab. The angels knew. In the presence of the infinite, every movement, every breath must be measured by awe. For Adab is not learned, it is remembered. It is the fragrance of what the soul once knew before it fell into form. When the divine said be, the first to respond was light, and light bowed in humility. The first act in the cosmic story was not creation, it was reverence. Even the angels, beings of pure radiance, knew that nearness to God is not earned through power, but through courtesy. The mystics tell us that when the command came, prostrate before Adam, the angels did not bow to clay. They bowed to the breath that God had placed within it, the secret of his own spirit. Adab begins there, to see through the surface of things, to recognize the divine face hidden beneath dust and imperfection. Every prophet that walked the earth carried this inner refinement, not as an etiquette of form, but as the fragrance of remembrance. Moses removed his sandals before the burning bush. Mary bowed in silence before the unseen voice. The prophet said, "My Lord taught me Adab and perfected my Adab." It was through courtesy that he ascended, and through humility that he carried heaven down to earth. The prophets did not speak for God. They spoke from the stillness where God speaks. Their words were the echoes of a listening heart. They did not command the world to worship. They invited the world to remember its own light. And in that remembrance, Adab was the bridge between the infinite majesty above and the fragile clay below. The angels' Adab was obedience without question. The prophet's Adab was love without resistance. And humanity's Adam, when it is awakened, is to mirror both, to move with obedience, to burn with love. When Gabriel descended, he bowed before the messenger, not out of hierarchy, but recognition. For the highest Adam is to know the place of each thing before the divine, to never mistake shadow for substance, nor forget that even light bows to a light beyond itself. This is the meaning of Subhana Rabbika, Rab Alizati Amma Yasifun. Glory to your Lord, the Lord of all might, beyond what they ascribe. Even the most exalted beings confess, we do not know you as you deserve to be known. That confession is Adab, the courtesy of knowing one's place before the infinite. In a world drunk on certainty, Adab restores wonder. It reminds the heart that knowledge without reverence is blindness in disguise, that speech without silence is arrogance wearing devotion's robe, and that even the angels made of light tremble in awe before the mystery that made them. The prophets carried that trembling as grace. Their gentleness was not weakness, it was alignment. They moved through the world as the wind moves through trees, soft, invisible, yet transforming all it touched. Their Adab was the quiet majesty of surrender, a stillness so deep that it became the language of God himself. And so, to follow them is not to imitate their words, but their way, their rhythm, their restraint, their luminous humility. To walk where they walked means to carry the same fragrance of presence, to enter every moment as if the infinite were watching through your eyes. That is the origin of Adab, the bow before existence, the silence before speech, the surrender before knowing, and the recognition that to be alive is already to stand in a sacred court. There was a time when even silence bowed, when every breath carried remembrance, and every glance was a prayer. But somewhere along the long descent of centuries, we forgot how to bow. We built towers higher than temples, but the heart, that ancient shrine, fell into ruin. The modern heart is now a temple without reverence. Its altar cluttered with noise, its prayers replaced by notifications. We still speak the names of the divine, but we no longer bow inside. Our tongues remember, but our hearts no longer tremble. The sacred gesture has become posture. The prayer has become performance. We chase meaning through speed and success, forgetting that the infinite is found only in stillness. Once, Adab was the fragrance of being, the invisible grace that gave form to beauty itself. Now we rush past each other like shadows, forgetting that every soul we pass is a doorway to God. In our haste, we no longer see, we only scan. We no longer listen, we only wait to reply. And in that forgetting, we have traded wonder for control and courtesy for consumption. This is the fall of Adab, not through rebellion, but through forgetfulness, not by malice, but by momentum. We became intoxicated by our own reflection, mistaking the mirror for the light. We built kingdoms of thought, but lost the kingdom of the heart. And when the heart no longer kneels, even the heavens fall silent within us. Ibn Arabi once said, "The heart of the knower is the throne of the merciful." But today, that throne stands empty, covered in the dust of distraction. We have filled ourselves with information, yet starved ourselves of meaning. We have learned to master the world, but forgotten how to be mastered by awe. The fall of Adab is not merely moral, it is ontological. It is the collapse of perception itself. When we no longer recognize the sacred in the ordinary, we live as orphans in a world that was meant to be a home. When gratitude dies, everything becomes currency. When reverence fades, every moment becomes noise. And yet, beneath this spiritual amnesia, something still aches to remember. The nostalgia we feel when watching the sunset, the quiet ache after beauty passes. These are the whispers of forgotten Adab, the soul remembering how to kneel before wonder. There is a sadness in our modern gaze, a yearning for the lost harmony between heaven and earth. We ache not for new experiences, but for the return of presence. We crave not entertainment, but remembrance. We miss something we cannot name, because what we long for is not of this world. The mystics call this longing hanin, the homesickness of the soul. It is the echo of the first bow, the moment when light itself humbled before the source. And every tear shed in silence, every pause between breaths, every act of unseen kindness is that lost Adab, remembering itself through us. For though we have fallen, we have not been abandoned. The sacred gesture still lives, hidden, trembling, waiting beneath the dust of our distractions. And every time you slow down, every time you listen instead of speak, every time you honor the unseen, you rebuild the temple within. This is how the world is healed. Not by noise, but by courtesy. Not by more light, but by reverence for the light already here. And perhaps, the return of Adab begins the moment one soul remembers to bow again. Before one can show Adab to the world, one must show it to the self, because the first kingdom entrusted to every soul is the heart. The Sufis say, "He who has no Adab with himself has none with his Lord." For Adab begins in the secret chambers, unseen, unspoken, where thoughts are born and desires take root. It is the discipline of the unseen gaze, the refinement of what only you and God can witness. To practice Adab toward the self is to stand guard over your inner world, to speak gently to your own soul, to watch your emotions as a king watches his realm, not with tyranny, but with care. For every thought is a visitor, every impulse a spark from unseen fire, and only the one who rules his inner kingdom with grace can bring harmony to the outer one. This is why the masters taught muraqabah, the watchfulness of the heart, not the policing of sin, but the cultivation of beauty. It is learning to sense the difference between a thought that lifts and a thought that stains, between what comes from the nafs, the ego's shadow, and what rises from the ruh, the spirit's light. How is the self is not self-denial, it is self-honoring. It is knowing that your being is a trust from the divine, a vessel of light that must be kept clear. When you eat, you remember that every morsel carries his name. When you rest, you remember that sleep is a minor death, and waking a small resurrection. Even how you breathe becomes sacred, for the breath itself is a guest of the eternal. The prophet said, "Cleanliness is half of faith," and the mystics understood. He was not speaking only of the body, but of the heart. To remove envy, anger, pride, is to sweep the temple of the soul. Adab is this daily cleansing, this invisible ablution, before entering the presence that dwells within. When you refine yourself, not for praise, but for proximity, something changes. The storms inside quiet, the soul softens, and you begin to feel the beloved looking out through your own eyes. For Adab toward the self is the root of all other courtesies. It is the unseen bow before the mirror of your being. It is to say, without words, "I will treat this life, this mind, this heart as sacred ground." And in that reverence, you rediscover the forgotten nobility of being human, the royal dignity of the one who remembers they are made in the image of the merciful. To know God is to know how to treat his creation. And Adab toward others is the mirror through which your inner refinement is revealed. The mystics say, every heart is a doorway to the divine. Tread gently, for when you speak to another soul, you are speaking to a reflection of the one. You may not see his face in them, but he is the listener behind their eyes. Adab toward others begins not in speech but in sight. To see each person not as an obstacle or a means, but as a verse of the infinite, written in a language you are meant to learn. It is to move through the world as if every encounter were a form of worship, a sacred conversation between two sparks of the same flame. In Sufi teaching, this is called Adab al-Subah, the etiquette of companionship. It means to be present with others, as you would be present with God, listening with your whole being, speaking with measure, acting as one aware of the unseen gaze that watches through every eye. The Prophet embodied this divine courtesy perfectly. He turned fully toward whoever spoke to him. He never interrupted, never looked away. Even when wronged, he responded with gentleness, for his heart had become the mirror of mercy itself. To live with Adab is to honor the divine spark in others without demanding that they understand yours. It is to give without expecting return, to forgive without memory, to listen not to reply but to receive. True courtesy is not born of effort, it flows from recognition. When you know that the one is speaking through all, how can you not bow inwardly at every voice? Adab toward others also means restraint, knowing when silence is kinder than truth, when stepping back is more generous than stepping forward. It is the discipline of mercy, to withhold your storm so another may keep their peace. This courtesy is not weakness, it is mastery. It is the strength of one who governs the self with love, who understands that harshness hides ignorance and gentleness reveals power. Every prophet, every saint, every true lover of God lived by this secret, that the way you treat creation is the way you address the Creator. To mock another is to mock his handiwork. To raise your voice is to disturb his silence. To look with compassion is to behold with his eyes. When you live in adab toward others, the boundaries between self and world begin to dissolve. You realize the one you forgive is yourself. The one you serve is the beloved wearing 1,000 faces. And so, the mystic learns to walk softly, as if each soul were a fragile vessel of light, because it is. To live with adab toward others is to let love become your etiquette, to treat the universe itself as a guest in your heart. There comes a moment on the path when adab ceases to be practiced and begins to breathe, when the heart that once tried to bow becomes the bow itself, when the self that once spoke of love dissolves into the silence of the beloved. This is the secret of the mirror. When the soul becomes so pure, so still, so translucent, that it no longer reflects the world, but the one who dreamt the world into being. The mystics said, when you move, it is the beloved moving through you. Here there is no I, no performer of reverence, only reverence itself, embodied. Patience no longer feels like a virtue, it becomes your breath. Gentleness no longer requires effort, it flows like light through an open window. Forgiveness no longer means choosing mercy. It is the fragrance you leave behind wherever your shadow falls. At this level, adab is not something one shows, it is what one is. The human being becomes a silent liturgy, a living prayer offered by the cosmos back to its source. Imagine a still pool beneath a night sky. The stars above are countless, but the surface is unbroken. Each light mirrored perfectly, each shimmer undisturbed. This is the state of the heart that has attained perfect adab. No turbulence of pride, no ripple of self-will, only the quiet transparency through which divine intention reflects itself effortlessly. When such a heart walks, it walks as mercy. When it speaks, its words heal. When it remains silent, its silence prays. This is the adab of love. Not manners, not formality, but alignment. To be so attuned to the divine pulse that you become its expression. Your eyes no longer see through separation. They behold every face as a verse of God. Your hands no longer act through choice. They move as instruments of tenderness. Your voice no longer seeks to convince. It becomes an echo of the hidden word, soft, luminous, true. The saint said that when the heart becomes a mirror polished by remembrance, the beloved gazes into it and sees himself. And in that seeing, you are reborn. The drop does not vanish into the ocean. It awakens to the truth that it was the ocean all along. This is the culmination of Adab, not behavior before God, but being through God. In this sacred stillness, there is no more effort, only flow. The soul becomes transparent, like glass filled with morning light. And through that transparency, the unseen begins to move visibly. Each gesture becomes Dhikr. Each breath becomes worship. Each glance carries the fragrance of divine remembrance. Nothing is performed, nothing is pretended. The real simply is. Here, Adab becomes the mirror of God's own humility, the infinite lowering itself to dwell within the finite. And in that descent, everything shines. For the one who reaches this station no longer walks toward the light. They walk as the light, quietly, humbly, unannounced. The world looks at them and sees a human being, but heaven looks and sees its own reflection. There comes a point in every seeker's journey when the heart finally understands that Adab is not about behavior, but about beauty. Not the beauty of form, but the beauty of being. The sacred harmony between the seen and the unseen. It is the bridge between creation and the Creator, the silent archway through which love crosses from the infinite into the world of dust. The mystics said, when Adab returns, the world becomes luminous again. For Adab is the rhythm of reverence, the secret pulse that once held heaven and earth in perfect conversation. When we lost it, the stars dimmed. When we remember it, even the smallest gesture becomes divine speech. To speak with Adab is to let the tongue remember the sanctity of breath. To walk with Adab is to remember the holiness of the ground beneath our feet. To live with Adab is to remember that every face you meet is a reflection of the one who dreamed you both. The real reveals itself only where reverence dwells. Without reverence, the sacred remains veiled. Without humility, beauty hides its face. But when the heart bows again, not in fear but in awe, the veil thins, and the light that was hidden in the dust begins to shimmer through all things. You begin to see that the world was never ordinary. Every movement of wind, every flicker of flame, every whisper of the sea, all of it is the courtesy of the divine, expressing itself through form. And so the purpose of Adab is not to perfect manners, but to awaken perception, to live in remembrance, to walk as if every step were upon holy ground, as if every moment were prayer, as if the entire cosmos were bowing beside you. For in truth, it is. This is the return to beauty, when the seeker stops chasing light and instead becomes transparent to it. When you no longer try to remember God, you begin to realize that it is God remembering Himself through you. Your presence becomes your prayer. Your stillness becomes your offering. Your life, a luminous courtesy extended to existence itself. And now silence descends again. The words have served their purpose. The sound of the flute returns to its reed. The ocean pulls its waves back into its heart. All that remains is the bow. Courtesy is not learned, it is remembered. Remembered from before time began, from when the soul stood in the garden of divine command and answered, yes, I bear witness. So the soul bows once more, not before an idol, not before an idea, but before the mystery that gave it breath. The heart listens, the silence listens back, and in that stillness, the two become one. Adab is the beloved's first language and the last word before silence. Like, share, and subscribe to Inner Alchemy, where wisdom becomes presence, and presence becomes remembrance.